Welcome to Basic Gospel, everybody. With Bob Christopher and Richard Piper, I'm Bob Davis, here to welcome you to our weekly teaching edition as we study through the pages of The New Covenant Journey, our study guide by that same name. We'll pick up on Chapter 3, page 27 of the study, the chapter called Our New High Priest. Well, if you don't yet have your copy, just go online to basicgospel.net/teaching. Again, that's basicgospel.net/teaching. And as a reminder, for those of you who had planned to call today, the phone lines are not open so that everyone can listen and benefit from this study. So with that, it's Basic Gospel's weekly teaching edition, everybody. And now, here's Bob Christopher.
Well, thanks, Bob. We are going into Chapter 3 today, our new high priest, the guarantee of the will. And in the first 4 lessons, we've talked about this new covenant that we live in today that was ushered in through the death of Christ. His blood ratified this new covenant. And this new covenant contains 4 specific promises. The fact that God will write His laws on our hearts and in our minds. So it shows that this covenant is Spirit-led. The fact that we are God's people and God is our God. That gives us assurance. And then we will all know God, from the least of us to the greatest. So that's relationship. That really gives meaning to that old phrase, Christianity is not a religion, but a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So it's all about relationship in this new covenant. And then there's the forgiveness of sins, that God will remember our sins no more, and where these have been forgiven, there is no longer any sacrifice for sin. Well, these are the promises of the new covenant, and as we said, this new covenant was ushered in at the death of Christ. But how do we know it's true? What's the guarantee? And that's going to take us right back to Jesus Christ, the one who is our high priest. And that's what this particular chapter is all about. So we have to ask the question, if Jesus is the guarantee, how do we know that He really existed? How do we know that He really offered up His blood as a sacrifice for sin? How do we know that He really died? How do we know that He was raised back to life? What is the evidence that we have that gives us assurance that this new covenant is guaranteed by Christ Himself? And it's interesting, in the 18th century, there's been a group of philosophers, primarily atheists, that tried to debunk and have been trying to debunk the story of Jesus. And so they have propagated this idea of the Christ myth, that He really didn't exist, He really didn't walk planet Earth, He really didn't die, He really wasn't raised from the dead. And their voices have made a lot of impact in culture today. A lot of people are doubting, and they're wondering, and they're seeking after new information, and a lot of folks are just thinking about the spirit of Jesus, what that's like, and not the historical Jesus. But boy, that is a wrong approach, and the Word of God makes sure that we know that Jesus actually existed. And so we see a lot of wonderful information in the gospel accounts about this person of Jesus Christ. So Richard, in Luke chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, that's the Christmas story. And as I grew up, every Christmas morning, my dad would open up the Word of God, and we would read Luke chapter 2, the Christmas story, one of my great memories of Christmas growing up. And we've tried to carry on that tradition in our family. But what do we learn about Jesus in this Christmas story, Luke 2, 4, and 5? Did He have parents? Did He just show up?
They were a myth as well. No, I mean, we've got eyewitness accounts that His father's name was Joseph and His mother's name was Mary. Eyewitness accounts. You've got to allow that to count for something. Luke wasn't making this up. He had talked to people. He probably knew Mary personally. We know Joseph was dead by the time Jesus was crucified. But these were real people, and there were real people who talked about these real people. And so He had parents. We know when He was born, within reason, because Luke, again, he looked it up. Caesar Augustus and Quirinius, two important names. We know who Caesar Augustus was, famous in Roman history, the golden age of Rome when he was the Caesar. And we know when he reigned, it was from 31 BC until 14 AD. We know that. Historians have nailed that down. And that would be enough, but he ties it in even closer. And that's he gets to this guy named Quirinius, who was the governor of Syria, and apparently lived in the city of Aleppo. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you've heard the city Aleppo mentioned many, many times over the last couple of years. Well, Aleppo is famous. It's existed since 2000 BC. 2000 BC. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the history of the world. And it sat right on a trade route, so that means it was important. Everybody wanted to own Aleppo, so various conquering groups would come through. They were beaten by everyone, but no one wanted to destroy the city. They wanted to keep it right there as this trade route. Well, there is an inscription that was found many, many years ago in Aleppo that describes Quirinius being the governor during this time when the census was taken. So it nailed it right down. We know that he was there in 6 BC, and so therefore we know that somewhere between 6 and 4 BC was when Jesus was born. It has to be, because we have these accounts. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, Aleppo is still a city. It's still an important city in the country of Syria. And it's being destroyed by the Syrian civil war between ISIS and all the various factions in the Syrian government. At one time, in the very recent past, 2010, 2011, 2.5 million people lived there, and it rivaled Damascus as the leading city in Syria.
Wow.
The industrial base was there, and everybody left it alone, and then ISIS showed up and started destroying things and all of this. What you probably don't know is that the highest number of Syrian Christians live in the city of Aleppo today. Those are the ones who are being picked on the most by ISIS and their hangers-on. So Aleppo is a real place. It was a real place back in Jesus' day. You know that Jesus had brothers and sisters. He had all of this stuff. We know who Pontius Pilate is. We know that he lived or ruled in the Palestine area from 26 to 36. Therefore, we have reasonable information about when Jesus was crucified. If you want history, the Jesus story has history. Documentable, absolutely provable history that Jesus existed.
So we have people.
We have people, places,
and dates.
And dates.
You know, all, like you said, all the history that you need. And then some of that history has been verified by other sources. Josephus wrote about Jesus. So it's not just the evidence of the Bible, although that's the primary evidence.
Yes.
That is really the source evidence and the most genuine evidence. But we find it in other places in history. So Jesus was a historical character. He was born at a point in time in a place called Bethlehem to Joseph and Mary. He was a part of a larger family. He had brothers and sisters, and it was in the context of the Roman Empire when Caesar was ruling and reigning. All of that is well documented. So we know that. Well, when Jesus started his ministry, when he showed up on the scene, was baptized by John the Baptist, and John the Baptist kind of shrunk out of the picture so that Jesus could take center stage. Well, Jesus began to perform miracles. He began to teach. And one of the things that he taught was truth about himself.
Yes.
He came to tell the world about himself. And so he had a lot of incredible statements. And he knew he had a purpose. We see that when he was 12 years old in Luke chapter 2, 46 and 49. After three days, they found him in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?"
Yeah.
So at the very beginning, we see that Jesus had this connection with God the Father. He was claiming that the temple was his Father's house.
Yes.
That is quite an announcement from a 12-year-old.
12-year-old. Yes.
But he was that perceptive as to who he was and what his role was. He was to be about his Father's business. And then we see in quite a number of passages that Jesus makes this incredible claim that he and the Father are one. And we see it primarily through the Gospel of John. We're going to start in John 8:58.
Yeah.
And this is an incredible story. Jesus is having one of those many conversations that he had with the Pharisees. And in John chapter 8, he looked at the Pharisees and said, "You're of your father, the devil." That wasn't information that they liked to hear.
Yes.
That ruffled some feathers. That stepped on some toes. That toppled over some golden calves that they were relying upon. But it was true. And then they started to question Jesus. And he said this, "Before Abraham was born, I am." So that's a significant statement. I mean, when we just read it for what it says, we're really not sure what Jesus is saying there until we connect it to an Old Testament story. We know the story of the Exodus. God had put his hands on Moses, basically, and said, "You're the guy. You're going to lead my people out." And Moses was kind of hemming and hawing and saying, "Maybe you're picking the wrong guy. You know, I stutter. I'm not eloquent. I'm just not sure I'm the guy." And so they continue this conversation, and Moses asked the question, "Well, who am I to say has sent me?" Well, in that conversation, God said this. God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." So in this conversation with the Pharisees, Jesus is claiming to be the I am. The same God that appeared to Moses in that burning bush and said, "I am," Jesus was saying, that's who he is. He and the Father are one. That's an incredible connection.
If it's not true, it's absolute blasphemy.
Yes, indeed.
Absolute.
Well, you're listening to Basic Gospel's weekly teaching edition, and our study guide is entitled The New Covenant Journey. And if you have yet to get your copy, you can do so by going to basicgospel.net and /teaching, basicgospel.net/teaching. And there you'll immediately see the teaching edition page, and from there you can request your copy of The New Covenant Journey. Again, that's at basicgospel.net/teaching. And a quick reminder, too, that because this is a teaching edition, the phone lines are not open today. I'm Bob Davis, along with Bob Christopher and Richard Piper, and back to our study.
Back to our study, page 29, right in the middle of page 29. We're seeing the statements that Jesus made, claiming that he and the Father were one. He made the statement that he was the I am before Abraham existed. He was I am, so he was claiming to be the same as the God of the Old Testament. John 14:11, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. John 10:30, I and the Father are one. John 18:5, I am. We see all of these incredible statements, and they are connecting Jesus to God the Father, equal, co-equal, a part of this Godhead that we know as the Trinity. So Jesus and the Father are one. And then we see quite a number of statements that Jesus made about himself that all begin with this phrase, I am. I am. Then Jesus declared in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So Jesus is claiming something about himself that will have benefit to us.
Yes.
And as we go through this, and as you go through this particular section on your own, I want you to ask this question. what need of your heart is Jesus Christ addressing through each and every one of these statements? So I am the bread of life. We need sustenance. We have to have food to survive. Well, Jesus isn't speaking about physical food. He is saying that he is our spiritual food. Apart from him, we're just dead. Yes. There is no life. There is no sustenance apart from him. It satisfies that hungering that we have deep in our souls and that thirst that we have. Jesus Christ being the bread of life. He said in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Boy, this world is darkness, and when we were lost, that's where we lived, in darkness. And that's why life was so difficult for us. We didn't know the direction that we needed to go. We were just groping around, trying to find something. But Jesus entered into that world of darkness as the light of the world, and if we follow him, then we're not going to be in darkness. We're going to have that light. So what need is he addressing there? So you ask that question of yourselves. What need is that addressing in your heart? And then he talked about being the gate and the good shepherd.
Yes. Both of these passages, John 10:9 and John 10:11, I'll go ahead and read them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. Jesus is literally telling us that he is the way to salvation. He is providing both himself as the gate so that we can not come in and go out in terms of losing salvation, but because we have come in through him, we have entered into salvation through him. Anywhere we go, we find pasture, we find peace and safety and assurance in him. And because he's the good shepherd, as well as the gate, notice in this analogy he's making about sheep, that he is everything good that the sheep need. Well, he's everything good that you and I need. And he laid his life down for us. He was the one who died for us instead of us dying for him. I mean, that's what it should have been. I mean, we should have been the ones who died, and Jesus would have stood there and said, yes, you should have died. But he didn't do that. He loved us so much that he laid his own life down and said, no, you folks are not going to die if you will accept me. I am your gate. I am your sheepfold. I am your shepherd. And in the previous verse we said out of John 10, I and the Father are one. You've got so guaranteed a salvation that no one can pry you out of my hand. I mean, spend some time in John 10 and ask yourself, who is this Jesus and what has he done for me? It will change your life.
No kidding. And it will give you the assurance that you need.
Yes.
If you're doubting your salvation, that is one of the best places to go to see exactly what Christ has accomplished. And, you know, I think of a gate, and I think what happened with Adam and Eve after they sinned, they were cast out of the garden, and there was angels put there to guard the way back in. So they were on the outside looking in. And that's where we are when we come into this world. We're on the outside. We're not a part of God's family. But through Jesus, as we enter into that gate, we become a part of the family of God. We find our rightful place in his family as one of his sheep, and we find pasture, as you were talking about. And then in John 11:25 and 26, he makes this incredible statement, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? This is our hope that's contained in the gospel, the fact that Jesus is the resurrection and life. He is the one who overcame death. And so through him, we overcome death and experience life everlasting. Death is no longer an enemy. He has removed the sting.
Yes.
And in Christ, we have total victory. Do you believe this? Now, this is the whole essence of the gospel message. As Paul wrote in Romans 10, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. How do we know he was raised from the dead? Well, we have historical evidence of that fact. We're going to talk about that at a later time. But we also have this incredible statement in which Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Apart from that resurrection, we have no hope. So this is our hope. This is what we needed. And then in John 15:1, I am the vine, and my Father is the gardener. He goes on to say, I am the true vine, you are the branch. Abide in me, and you will bear much fruit, and apart from me, you can do nothing. So our source of life is not ourselves. Yes. Our source of life is not found out there in the world. It's not found out there in philosophy or anything like that. Our source of life is Jesus Christ himself. He is the vine, we're the branch. And if we abide in him, we're going to bear the fruit of his life in this world. And we know that fruit as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. The ninefold fruit of the Spirit. We bear that as we abide in the vine, the true source of life.
Yeah, it occurs to me that we have a choice. We can plug ourselves into the world, which would be like plugging myself into a wall socket and wondering why I'm being killed with the electricity, or I can plug myself into Christ, the true source of life, and be safe forever.
Yes, indeed. And then the last I am that we'll cover today is this, John 14:6. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is the only way.
The only way.
There are no other ways. That is a big question out there in the world today. Are there many other ways to God? And a lot of people that you would think would say no are starting to say yes. Yeah, there probably are other ways to God, but not if you read what Jesus has to say. This is an exclusive statement. It is not an inclusive statement. It is exclusive. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. There's no other way to God the Father except through Jesus Christ the Son. There is no other truth about God the Father other than that which has been revealed to us through Jesus Christ the Son. And there is no other life from God the Father than what has been given to us in Jesus Christ the Son. That's just it. There's no other option on the menu. There's no other place that we can go to find the way, the truth, and the life. Now, a lot of folks take umbrage with that. That's offensive to them. But I use this example. Say somebody in Chicago, a group of physicians found the cure for cancer. And it cured all cancers, not just certain types and strains, but all cancers. And you had a loved one that had cancer. What would you tell them? Well, go to Chicago. Get the cure. Well, you might say, well, what about those guys in Atlanta? Or what about those guys in England? Or what about those that team of physicians in Korea? Or that team in South Africa? Or that team, in the Middle East? What about them? They're doing great work in trying to find the cure for cancer. Well, let me ask you this. Do they have the cure for cancer? Can you go there and be cured? Well, no. Well, then why would you want to go there?
You have to go to Chicago.
You have to go to Chicago. Why? Because that's the only place that has the cure for cancer. Jesus is the only one that has life. Jesus is the only one that has truth. Jesus is the only one who is the way. If you want to know God the Father, if you want to experience life everlasting, if you want to know truth that will set you free, you have to go to Jesus. And that's why in all of these, he makes the statement, I am. And he is the only person that has ever walked the planet that has said, come unto me.
Absolutely. That's always good news. It's always the good news that you hear on Basic Gospel. And you have been listening to Basic Gospel's weekly teaching edition from our study guide, The New Covenant Journey. If you have yet to get your copy, as I said earlier, simply go to basicgospel.net/teaching. There you'll see the teaching edition page, and from there you can request your copy of The New Covenant Journey. Again, that's at basicgospel.net/teaching. And a quick reminder, too, that Basic Gospel is a listener-supported broadcast, and we appreciate all of you who are partnering with us. We'll be back for another live edition. I hope you'll be with us next time.